The story is set in the year 421 in the kingdom of Granbald, which is surrounded by monsters. This is the last safe haven for humanity, and the few survivors have gathered here. Faced with this situation, the soldiers try to hold on to hope. But reality is a whole different, cruel story. You can see the desperation in their faces, the fear that this might be the last day of their lives. To make matters worse, dragons appear in the skies, and one of them readies a massive fire attack. A moment later, the creature fires a blast of energy at the fortress walls. Because of this, a gigantic explosion occurs, completely obliterating the castle's defenses. With a clear path, a horde of monsters charges into what's left of the kingdom. A giant creature looking like a minotaur snatches a soldier with ease. From there, chaos spreads everywhere, and humanity's fate seems to be sealed. The battlefield is covered with bodies and flames in every direction you look. Meanwhile, the survivors run to a building, shouting for the next injured person. Inside, a makeshift hospital is packed with wounded and fading warriors. A healer tries to save a man, but the guy ultimately succumbs to his injuries. That's when our protagonist shows up, offering to heal everyone with his power. A soldier rushes in, frantic, warning that the gate has been breached and telling Will to run for it. The guy insists, saying it's too dangerous for a healer like him to be on the front lines. Our protagonist gets ticked off, questioning if he should just abandon everyone. So, he declares that he won't let humanity disappear as long as he can heal. He has a flashback of a woman telling him that with his power, he could save the world. Another memory surfaces, with a man naming him the greatest healer in the world. Faced with the situation, Will's determination grows as his name is called. Right after, a guard desperately looks for him, and the wounded general is brought in. The soldier carrying his superior is worried about the general's critical condition. Will asks them to put the man on the ground, because without him, the war would already be lost. Our protagonist then guarantees in front of all the soldiers that he will save him. He shouts out loud that this is exactly why he's there. From that point on, the young man begins to use his healing magic on the general on the ground. A powerful green light explodes from him, knocking people back with its force. Will's arm glows intensely, showing just how potent his healing magic is. The energy coming from our protagonist's hand is so strong that it shines brightly. Around them, the other soldiers watch in amazement at the young man's incredible healing power. A moment later, the magic takes effect, and the general slowly begins to open his eyes. Suddenly, the man stands up completely healed, and everyone celebrates Will's achievement. The young man tells the general that no matter how injured he gets, their victory is certain. However, the recovered man gets a serious expression and stares at the young healer. His gaze completely shifts to one of pure rage, making the mood incredibly tense. Out of nowhere, the general clocks our protagonist right in the face, who has no clue what just happened. After that, the man says the kid did something unnecessary as he clenches his fist. The surrounding soldiers are shocked by his action, and Will wonders why he just got punched. The guards then question the general about what he just did to the healer, but the man screams at everyone to shut up with a terrifying look in his eyes. He then draws his sword, preparing to strike again at any moment. Our protagonist is terrified on the ground with absolutely no idea what is happening. Without a second thought, the general simply attacks the young healer with his sword. The general furiously yells, asking if it was the healed arm that wouldn't let him pass on in peace. He continues, saying a healer would never understand the suffering of fighting on the front lines. From there, the man unloads about the false hope of being healed only to be sent right back to the meat grinder. And so, he reveals that all the soldiers there are exhausted and don't want to fight anymore. Our protagonist looks at the other warriors and sees the truth in each of their faces. Will is in shock, questioning if all his effort to save everyone was pointless. He thinks about all his sweat and tears and wonders if it was all for nothing. The general then says he's sick of suffering because of him as he attacks with his sword. A moment later, the man says humanity is already lost, and if Will wants to fight, he can fight alone. Our protagonist panics because as a healer, he can't use attack magic. Faced with the situation, the general and his men turn their backs and leave the young man behind. At that very moment, one of the dragons outside prepares another powerful fire attack. The creature then fires a blast of energy, causing a gigantic explosion on sight. Because of this, everything around Will is destroyed, and he's left alone amidst the rubble. Lying on the ground, the general uses his last bit of strength to tell the healer to get out of there. In his final moments, the general can't hold on and passes away, crushed by the debris. Our protagonist protects himself as best he can from the blast that devastates everything around him. With that, he finally understands the true despair the soldiers felt in battle. From then on, the young man realizes just how terrible the monsters they all faced were. Will then admits to himself that he was just watching everything from a safe place. Furious, he regrets wasting so much time learning only healing magic. He has a flashback to when he was younger and first discovered his talent for healing. Another memory emerges, showing the day he received the title of the world's best healer. Full of regret, our protagonist screams that he should have been the one fighting on the front lines. Faced with the situation, the young man picks up a simple rock from the ground as his only weapon. Without a second thought, Will runs towards the giant dragon for one last showdown. As he runs, he wishes with all his might that he could go back in time and do things differently. However, the gigantic creature opens its enormous mouth, preparing to devour him. Suddenly, everything goes dark and two spheres, one red and one blue, appear out of nowhere. A blue drop falls into the water, creating a ripple, and everything seems to start over from scratch. All of a sudden, our protagonist wakes up startled, as if from a nightmare. He sits up in bed and realizes he's in a peaceful room with the morning sun shining in. Confused, the young man looks around and wonders where he is. His eyes then fix on a letter sitting on the room's desk. The young man recognizes the envelope as the enrollment guide for the Magic Academy. From there, he starts to break into a cold sweat as he realizes he has somehow gone back in time. He remembers that day perfectly. It happened exactly 5 years in the past. And so, Will questions how he's alive, as he clearly remembers being taken out by a dragon. He then realizes he's back to 1 week before he entered the Healing Magic Academy. But if his last wish was granted, our protagonist knows exactly what he needs to do. The young man then crumples the letter with all his strength and determination. He decides that this time, he's going to enroll in the Attack Magic Academy, Kashwar's Academy. Our protagonist knows that healers can't use attack magic, but he's determined to break that rule. However, he knows it won't be easy, but with the memories of his past life, he can change the future. Faced with the situation, the young man swears that this time, he himself will fight and save the world with his own hands. His first step is to get into the best offensive magic academy, the famous Kashwar's Academy. Its education is known for its excellence throughout the kingdom, producing the best mages in existence. They can turn anyone into a first-class attack mage. Will then remembers a very strong person he knew in his past life who also went there. Their combat theory, however, is top secret and can only be learned by enrolling in the school. Our protagonist becomes thoughtful, as there has never been a case of a healer enrolling before. He recalls that the academy is so good that nobles pay fortunes for their children to get in. The young man regrets not being able to bring the money from his past life to pay the hefty tuition. Even if he started working as a healer now, there wouldn't be enough time to save up the necessary cash. In this moment of doubt, a familiar female voice calls his name from the bedroom door. As he turns, our protagonist is completely shocked to see his older sister standing there. With that, he finally understands that he has indeed returned to the past, because his sister is still alive. The young woman gets worried by her brother's reaction and asks if he's okay, but Will plays it off. With a radiant smile on her face, the young woman joyfully responds to his, "Good morning." Our protagonist thinks that with his healing magic, he can prevent the tragedy that is going to happen to her. From there, a brilliant idea sparks in his mind, like a light at the end of the tunnel for his problems. He thanks his sister and says that because of her, he can achieve his goal, leaving the girl confused. The young man says goodbye, mentioning he's heading out, and she asks him to be back before dinner. The Federation of Magic Academies is the organization that oversees all magical academies in the kingdom. At this time, the Federation's president was the director of Kashwar's Academy, but he almost stepped down. The reason for this decision was kept inside a large, luxurious mansion at night. Through the window, an old man can be seen caring for a sick girl lying in bed. The young blonde girl seems to be suffering greatly with a very high fever, sweating constantly. Very carefully, the man touches the girl's face, who seems to get worse with each passing day. This is Arnold Agolagran, the Academy's director and the Federation's president, taking care of his granddaughter, Marie. He apologizes because the healer wasn't good enough but promises to find someone to cure her. Due to her illness, the director spent all his free time caring for his very sick granddaughter. However, the healing magic of that era wasn't enough to save her, and the girl ended up passing away. But that was the story of his past life, and this time our protagonist is here to change the future. Right after, he appears at the bedroom window and offers to take over as the healer. Arnie Lagolagran is surprised to see the young man climbing into his house through the window in the middle of the night. To the young man's shock, the director recognizes him as Will, the scholarship student from Healing Academy. He comments that the kid's talent is famous, but he didn't expect Will to be the breaking and entering type. Our protagonist gives an awkward laugh and thinks that after kicking the bucket once, his actions have gotten a bit bolder. Will then gets serious and explains there was no time to waste, neither for him nor for the sick girl. With total confidence, the young man approaches the bed and claims he can cure the director's granddaughter. Suspicious, Arnie Lagolagran questions the young man about his true motives. The kid says that can wait and asks for permission to treat the girl, as her illness is progressing quickly. A tense atmosphere settles in the room as the two stare each other down in dead silence. After a few seconds of reflection, the director finally agrees to let the young healer give it a try. Our protagonist then sits beside the bed, preparing to start the treatment. On his face, you can see the determination and nervousness of someone holding a life in their hands. Will feels the director's intense gaze, who looks ready to pounce at any mistake. Our protagonist takes a deep breath, focusing to begin the healing procedure. Right after, he gently takes the young woman's hand to use his magic. From there, a green light bursts from the young man, illuminating the entire room with its power. Going back in time reduced his mana, but he still remembers the healing formulas. He knows that the cure for Zora's disease would only be discovered 2 years from now. However, with his knowledge of the future, he can perform the treatment right now. Suddenly, the girl opens her eyes, and our protagonist tells her she's going to be okay. With a confident smile, the young man assures the girl that the danger has passed. He advises her to rest as her stamina is low, and the girl blushes. The young man feels a bit awkward at her reaction, and she stammers a reply. Arnila Golagran approaches, concerned, and asks Veronica if she's really okay. The girl replies yes and mentions how long it's been since she felt this good. The director watches his healed granddaughter with an expression of pure relief and happiness. Our protagonist simply observes the scene with a sense of accomplishment, for now. The director feels relieved seeing his granddaughter well, and carefully covers her with the sheet. A little later in the living room, Arnila Golagran profusely thanks the young man for saving his granddaughter. With that, the man promises that in gratitude, he will do anything our protagonist asks. Will then explains that his healing magic is already perfect, and there's nothing left for him to learn. From there, he finally reveals his wish and asks to enter the famous Schwarz Academy. Arnila Golagran is surprised, as he doesn't understand why such a good healer would want to go there. But our protagonist responds with absolute certainty that he knows exactly what he's doing. The director then sees in the young man's eyes a determination he has never seen before in his life. Faced with the situation, the man says his authority as director is for days like this. With a confident smile on his face, he assures the young man he will handle the entire process for him. And so, Arnila Golagran approves Will's enrollment in the Attack Magic Academy. Their handshake seals the deal, and our protagonist's future is about to change forever. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a man complains that the director just got back and is already making a mess. He smiles wickedly, wondering if the new student will be able to handle the school's curriculum. The man reads the file, sees that Will is a healer, and to him, that kind of mage is just a wimp. On the day of the entrance ceremony, all the new students gather in front of the academy. Director Arnila Golagran appears before everyone with a very serious expression on his face. This is Schwarz Academy, specializing in offensive magic with a unique teaching curriculum. In addition, the place boasts state-of-the-art research facilities for its students. The school also has a gigantic library so everyone can further their studies. Its graduates become so influential that they receive various kinds of support from the kingdom. Because of this, there is no better environment to study attack spells. Will knows it will be difficult, as there has never been a case of a healer enrolling there. But he's determined, because here he can become the attack mage he always wanted to be. Our protagonist remembers the horrors of his past life and how it all ended. The young man then swears to himself that this time, he will change his own destiny. Shortly after enrolling, during a practical class, the young man already looks pretty tired. A professor then tells him to begin his training on a nearby wooden dummy. Our protagonist concentrates and tries to cast a fire spell with a magic circle. However, the effort is so great that he's left breathless and almost out of strength to continue. With that, the fire spell he was trying to create simply fizzles out in his hand. The professor then says he failed once again, while other students laugh at him. He then bans him from classes until he can use magic and tells him to train alone. Our protagonist asks to be taught properly, as he doesn't even know how he's supposed to practice. But the man responds with disdain that teaching a healer is a complete waste of time. Will asks to study in the library, and the professor denies it, saying there are no books for him. At that moment, another blonde student gives a very malicious smirk, watching the whole situation. Right after, he attacks our protagonist from behind, saying he's in the way. Because of this, the young man is thrown hard to the ground, unable to react to the sudden attack. Lying on the ground, the guy is completely confused, and the attacker laughs because he couldn't even dodge. The blonde brags that this is no place for a wimp who can't protect himself. He then says it's always the victim's fault, leaving Will completely shocked. The professor agrees with Ulpus and suggests the young man transfer to a healing academy. The bully continues his mockery, saying that there he can be comforted by his friends. Our protagonist stays on the ground with a look of pure rage as everyone laughs at him. Later that night, our protagonist rests in the training yard, completely frustrated. He thinks there's no sign he'll master offensive magic this way. The young man already knew it would be a struggle, since healing and attack magic use different sources. A mage converts the power of the mind, known as mana, into spells through magical formulas. But the type of mana is defined by the heart, and healers can only use calm mana, not active mana. However, Schwar's Academy has the knowledge to train attack mages almost from scratch. Because of this, he believed he could learn to convert his calm mana into active mana there. But he can't even attend classes and remembers how the students and the professor look down on him. Despite everything, our protagonist gets up determined because he can't give up now. He remembers someone who also had little mana and refined it here at the academy. The young man knows it's pointless to continue like this and considers sneaking into the school library. Suddenly, a voice calls out to him, asking what he's doing out there at this time of night. Our protagonist gets flustered and apologizes as the person approaches him in the yard. His eyes widen as he recognizes who is approaching in the darkness. He watches the mysterious figure walking slowly across the dark academy courtyard. The girl's cold, blue eyes stare at our protagonist in the darkness of the night. Before him stands Veronica, an imposing figure with her silver hair and sword at her hip. Our protagonist is in shock as he recognizes her and stammers her name in disbelief. He remembers fighting alongside her in his past life, as she was an elite attack mage. Another painful memory surfaces of him holding the wounded girl in his arms at the very end. The young man thinks how nostalgic it is to see her again and remembers the power of her magic sword. Suddenly, the young woman draws her blade, which glows intensely, terrifying Will. She explains that she saw a suspicious student and is therefore on guard, making the young man very scared. The girl then questions whether he's causing trouble or is just very enthusiastic. Our protagonist panics and says it's just enthusiasm because he knows she's dangerous. Veronica accepts the excuse and sheathes her sword, while the young man breathes a sigh of relief. Will calls her by name to confirm, and the young woman coldly replies that yes, it's her. However, she scolds him, asking if that's how he addresses a professor at the academy. The young man is shocked by the revelation, because in his past life, she wasn't much older than him. The young woman explains that she skipped a few grades and just became a professor this year. Our protagonist smiles awkwardly and thinks that with Professor Veronica's talent, it makes sense. Suddenly, his eyes get serious as he realizes this is the perfect chance for him. He then thinks that with her help, he can finally learn offensive magic. The young professor notices his strange look and stares back at him with a cold expression. Our protagonist approaches and says he wants to take classes with Professor Veronica. He then asks with a determined expression how he can enroll in her class. The young woman replies that she doesn't have classes, as she skipped many grades and didn't have many normal ones. She explains that this year she's working as an assistant instructor to answer students' questions. But for some reason, the young woman confesses that none of the students approach her to ask anything. Will thinks that everyone is afraid of her because the professor draws her sword so quickly. He sees this as a great opportunity and asks to pose a question to the young woman. The young man gets straight to the point and asks what a healer should do to learn attack magic. Veronica realizes there was something strange about our protagonist's mana flow from the start. She then says she understands and that he's the famous freshman everyone is talking about. The young man is surprised she knows about him, and the professor comments that his case is quite rare. Will argues that he heard about a Schwar's method for cultivating mana, and she confirms she can teach it to him. Our protagonist gets super excited about the news, but the girl interrupts him with a "but." The professor states that for him, it would be impossible to use offensive magic with that method. The young man is confused and Veronica explains that he already has too much static mana in his body. Veronica explains that dynamic mana would dissolve into the static mana and attack formulas wouldn't work. Our protagonist asks if there's any way, and the professor replies not one that she knows of. Even though he's frustrated, the young man doesn't give up and decides that if there isn't a method, he'll create one himself. With that, he thanks the young woman for her help and says he'll think about it a bit more. As the young man turns to leave, the professor calls him, saying their conversation isn't over. She then reveals that even if a healer can't use magic, there is a way to become an offensive mage. Our protagonist is confused by the information and asks what she means by that. Veronica then draws her sword, explaining that it's made of iron and is used to attack enemies. Right after, the professor puts her foot on a nearby wooden bench. She points to the object and says it's made of wood, and its function is for people to sit on. But the young woman lifts the bench with one hand and says you can also hit someone with it. The young woman throws the bench on the ground, explaining that the use of something is open, even if it has another purpose. The professor then shows her hand and says the same principle applies to herself. Suddenly, she gently touches our protagonist's face to give a very practical example. The young man turns bright red and gets flustered by the professor's unexpected touch. Then she slaps him across the face, saying her hand can also be used for hurting. Veronica sums it up by saying it all depends on how you use it, and that anything can become a weapon. With that, a light bulb goes off in our protagonist's mind, and he wonders if he can use healing to attack. The professor just gives him a confident smile, confirming that his reasoning is correct. Will questions why he never thought of this, and she explains it's due to the nature of each person's mind and mana. She continues, saying that attack and healing mages simply aren't interested in each other. However, the professor looks at him and states that he is probably different from other mages. Veronica reveals that his mana is not that of a pure healer, and his very presence there proves it. Our protagonist is shocked by the information and wonders if his regression caused this change. Right after, she points her sword at the young man and tells him to realize something. The professor tells him to awaken the aggressive passion that exists within him. She guarantees that if he can do that, his healing magic will definitely crush his enemies. The next day, the students are once again gathered in the courtyard for daily training. Our protagonist stands there, remembering the conversation he had with Veronica the night before. He thinks about how strange her analogy was, but that it opened his eyes to new ideas. The young man reflects that Veronica showed no rejection and found his combat theory odd. Suddenly, the professor calls him Keeler, and Will notices he doesn't even use his name anymore. The man then announces 1-on-1 battles, and since there's an odd number, Will also fight. He continues, saying it's the kid's fault for not knowing magic and that he'll reap what he sows. With a malicious smile, the man says he has already decided all the pairings for today's battle. Unsurprisingly, the professor pits him against the bully named Ulpus. Our protagonist realizes the choice was deliberate as the professor laughs in his face. This is Ulpus Omen, a noble from a famous family who always hangs around with his followers. The young man knows the blonde doesn't just rely on his name, but is also an excellent offensive mage. The bully provokes him, asking if his mommy will comfort him after he gets beaten up badly. Our protagonist gives a little smile and thinks he expected this kind of personality from the blonde. He admits he's getting pretty annoyed and wants to test the professor's theory to fight back. The young man then calls out to the professor, who warns him that he won't allow him to forfeit. Our protagonist denies it and says he won't quit, but he has a proposal to make. He says he understands he has no talent and proposes that if he loses this fight, he will leave the academy. The professor smiles maliciously and says our protagonist's decision is very wise. But Will proposes that if he wins, he can attend normal classes, which irritates the man. Ulpus starts laughing, finding the bet amusing, and says he sees no problem with it. He continues, saying the fight wouldn't be fun if there wasn't something for him to break. The professor agrees, because to him, it's a waste of time to argue about something he thinks is impossible. The man then tells the two students to go to their positions and prepare for the fight. Right after, he raises his arm high and forcefully shouts for the combat to begin. Without wasting any time, Ulpus begins preparing an attack spell with his hands crossed. He then creates a magic circle, summoning several fire daggers around him. The blonde brags about his knife creation magic and says he's going to finish off his opponent. With that, the numerous fiery blades fly straight towards our protagonist. Will, however, remains calm and concentrates with his hands together, preparing to act. A healing magic circle with green energy then appears in his hands. His eyes glow with an intense green light, showing his complete determination in the fight. Faced with the situation, he swiftly dodges the daggers coming his way. Ulpus is completely shocked, not understanding how the guy dodged everything. Will explains that his magic manipulates life and can boost his physical power to the max. Furious with the situation, the bully charges, telling him not to get cocky over a lucky break. Our protagonist then uses his healing magic to strengthen his own body. Seizing the opportunity, he picks up one of the fire daggers that fell to the ground. With the weapon in hand, the young man masterfully starts deflecting all the other projectiles. All the fire blades are deflected and fall to the ground around him. Will smiles at his opponent and says that was just perfect for his plans. He then grips the dagger firmly, preparing for a counter-attack. With a confident look, our protagonist says he's going to borrow the weapon. The other students are shocked, wondering if that was really an attack spell. Our protagonist thinks that no one noticed because he just used his healing to attack. Ulpus gets really angry and frustrated with the situation as he didn't expect this turnaround. He says he was just holding back and summons a much larger number of fire daggers. The blonde yells that there's no way an offensive mage can lose to a simple healer like him. But Will dodges all the blades with impressive and effortless superhuman speed. All the daggers end up stuck in the ground while the bully can't believe his eyes. Ulpus says it's not just about numbers and begins to prepare a much more powerful spell. He then increases the size of the blades and creates a single giant fire sword. Our protagonist admits to himself that his opponent is quite strong and understands his own magic well. To make matters worse, the bully adds rotation, and the giant sword begins to spin like a deadly drill. Right after, he launches the attack with full force towards our protagonist. The spinning sword hits the ground hard, causing a large explosion of energy and dust. However, Ulpus is completely shocked by what happens next right in front of him. Our protagonist grits his teeth in pain as he holds back his opponent's powerful attack. Ulpus screams in desperation, unable to believe his strongest attack was stopped like that. Meanwhile, our protagonist wonders if he should strengthen his body even more. With a cry of effort, he throws the giant sword aside with absurd strength. The blonde can't believe what he's seeing and yells that it's simply impossible. Right after, the young man appears behind his opponent and says he'll heal him up properly later. He then prepares to attack the bully with the dagger he picked up from the ground earlier. Suddenly, a voice shouts, "That's enough," and a huge wall of earth erupts between the two. Because of this, the attack is interrupted, and both are thrown far apart from each other. The stone wall separates the battlefield, showing the power of whoever intervened. The professor appears and tells both students to back off, as the next fight is about to begin. Opus stays on the ground, terrified, while our protagonist glares at him, dagger in hand. Will then turns to the professor and asks if he can attend normal classes now. The man is clearly irritated but agrees, telling the young man to do whatever he wants. With a victorious smile, our protagonist thanks the man very much for his permission. He then says his goodbyes and leaves, leaving his opponent behind on the ground. Our protagonist thinks about the sensation he just felt during the battle. He reflects that this is his own version of magic, and it was better than he had imagined. In his thoughts, he thanks Professor Veronica for helping him become an attack mage. The young man then gives a confident smile because his plan is working out perfectly. The academy's flag waves in the wind, marking the beginning of a new day at school. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Opus tells the professor that what happened was a classroom accident. The blonde gets up and says he doesn't want to report every little thing that happens to his father. He then shoots a threatening look and asks if the professor got the message. The man looks uncomfortable and replies that yes, he understood the message perfectly. But in his thoughts, he swears he won't let a healer get a big head. Soon after, we see all the students sitting in a very spacious classroom. Our protagonist thinks that he'll finally be able to attend classes and learn offensive magic. At that moment, the professor enters the room, and all the students turn to look at him. The man looks at the class with a scornful gaze and a very malicious smile on his face. He then announces that today's class will be on creating magical tools. Our protagonist finds the class nostalgic, as he remembers a similar one at the Healing Academy. The professor then reveals that the goal of the class is to create very powerful ice bombs. The man then distributes the materials and tells the class to follow the procedure exactly. Our protagonist remembers that in his past life, he only made healing items like health potions. He reflects that the item's function depends more on the materials than the mana used in its creation. Given this, he believes he can get through the class without any problems or difficulties. Inside the bag are a fragment of an ice golem and powdered branches from a fire tree. The young man reads the instruction book on how to correctly mix the two magical items. Suddenly, the crystal glows and our protagonist is surprised by the unexpected reaction. He has a vision of body enhancement, and a blue beam shoots across the classroom out of nowhere. Immediately after, the beam causes a giant ice explosion right in the middle of the classroom. A huge ice crystal forms at the impact site of the uncontrolled magic. Our protagonist is left completely confused by what just happened in front of him. The professor yells furiously at the young man, asking what he thinks he's doing. The young man tries to explain, but the professor cuts him off and warns that he's docking points from his grade. Our protagonist feels awkward with the professor's scolding and the stares from everyone in the room. On the other side of the room, Opus and his friend laugh mockingly at the young man. The blonde gives a very malicious smile, taking the opportunity to mock his rival's situation. But Will isn't fazed and faces the challenge head-on with a look of pure determination. The next class begins, and our protagonist braces himself for what's coming. The following lesson is about magical creatures, and a small salamander is in a cage on the desk. Our protagonist observes the small animal in front of him with a very curious expression. The professor then tells those with bad grades to sit right at the front to pay attention. The young man thinks the distance to the salamander is a bit dangerous and feels suspicious. Suddenly, the creature spits fire, and the young man defends himself with a pan he brought. The professor asks why he has a pan, and Will says he thought it might be useful. With that, the man confiscates the pan, leaving our protagonist completely defenseless. Our protagonist then realizes the professor is doing all of this on purpose to sabotage him. He realizes that he can attend classes, but they won't let him learn anything properly. Faced with the situation, the young man wonders what he can do to get around this problem. At that moment, our protagonist looks to the side and notices a girl sitting there. She has a somewhat sad expression on her face and seems to be keeping to herself. The harassment against the young man continues, and Opus attacks him from behind with fire, saying his hand slipped. In the classroom, the professor humiliates him with a question he doesn't know and still deducts points for it. Outside of class, the harassment continues with students throwing trash at our protagonist's dorm room door. To make matters worse, the dorm supervisor makes him skip dinner as punishment for causing trouble in class. Back in his room, the young man vents about how much opposition he's facing within the academy. He feels overwhelmed, as it seems there's still a mountain of challenges ahead to overcome. But he clenches his fist, determined not to be brought down by all the harassment from others. Besides, he remembers fighting with his own hands for the first time and achieving victory. With that in mind, our protagonist raises his fist, full of confidence, because he knows he can become an attack mage. The young man then decides to review the lesson, as he finally got his textbook to study. The next day, he is sitting alone in a completely empty and silent classroom. Will looks at the clock and notices that it's past time, but the professor still hasn't shown up. A girl watches him from afar, thinking that the news of the classroom change was kept secret. She then gets up and decides to leave, as there's no point in waiting there any longer. However, our protagonist calls out to her, and the girl responds with a very surprised highs. Our protagonist asks if the classroom for the next lesson has changed, and the girl thinks it's just as she imagined. He wonders why only he, the one hated by everyone, is in that empty classroom. The young woman makes a strange face, and thinks that she must be on the side of the outcasts too. So, she suggests that the two loners should get along, and Will finds her words sharp. With a smile, our protagonist says he's happy to have a friend and extends his hand to the young woman. The girl accepts the handshake very shyly and nervously, with the whole unexpected situation. Right after, the young woman introduces herself, saying her name is Erica Glenn. Erica tells Will that she understands why he's a target, since he's a healer and missed classes. The young woman continues, explaining that everyone says healers are naturally weak. Our protagonist jokes that even when attending classes as an attack mage, he doesn't have any friends either. He thinks that the discrimination against healers is very strong, and that attack mages look down on them. The young man remembers that in his past life, he was the kingdom's exclusive healer and suffered for it. So, he understands that in an attack academy, he'll have to fight against this prejudice. The girl looks at him with a curious expression and seems to want to ask him something. Erica then gets straight to the point and questions why he came to Schwarz Academy. Our protagonist becomes thoughtful with the girl's question about his reasons for being there. With a determined look, he replies that he realized being born a healer isn't a reason to run from a fight. The young man deflects the question and asks Erica about her reasons for being at the academy, surprising her. The girl then explains that she comes from a small noble family living in the countryside. Since her parents didn't have any sons, she decided to become a mage to prove that a woman can lead the family. Will agrees with her logic, as graduating from Schwarz would indeed make that possible for the young woman. However, the young woman laments not having a talent for attack magic, which is why she can't make friends. But she corrects herself with a smile and says she just made a friend right then. With that, Erica jokes that she won't feel so bad about her poor grades with him around as a friend. Our protagonist smiles and thinks that things might not turn out as the girl expects in the future. He then invites her to go look for the classroom where the real lesson is taking place. The two then leave the empty classroom, and Erica rushes to keep up with our protagonist. After searching the academy's hallways for a bit, he finally finds the correct room. But as soon as they enter, the professor yells at them, saying they're late for class. The two apologize and explain that they didn't know about the room change, as the other students stare. The professor, however, doesn't accept excuses and glares at them with a very cold and irritated look. With a malicious smile on his face, the man decides to use the situation to humiliate the young man. He then points to a magic circle on the board and tells our protagonist to answer the question. Erica gets super worried, because Will just arrived and there's no way he could know the answer. But our protagonist remains silent, observing the board with a very calm expression. The man proposes that if the young man gets it right, he'll forgive the tardiness, but if he's wrong, he'll lose a lot of points. In the back of the room, Opus laughs at him, saying that at this rate, the guy will fail on the spot. To everyone's surprise, our protagonist simply picks up a piece of chalk and walks to the blackboard. With a steady hand, he breaks the tip of the chalk, preparing to write the answer on the board. Seeing this, Eric and Opus are shocked as the young man begins to draw a complex formula. His hand moves with speed and precision, writing symbols no one expected him to know. In seconds, he finishes drawing a perfect magic circle that glows brightly on the board. Our protagonist then turns and asks the professor what he thought of the answer. The man's jaw drops, and he starts sweating, unable to believe what just happened. He is completely speechless with the perfect answer and doesn't know how to react. Opus shouts in shock as the professor confirms that our protagonist's answer is correct. Erika is completely baffled and wonders how the young man knew the answer to such a difficult question. With a confident smile, our protagonist sits down and enjoys the silence and shock of everyone. After class, Erika is still impressed and turns to talk to our protagonist. The girl then asks how he managed to solve that difficult problem on the board. Will explains that he had seen the material before in the textbook, leaving the young woman shocked. She yells in disbelief that he read the entire book by himself, and the young man confirms it. Our protagonist thinks that he read it all the day before, and that the Academy's books were incredible. The material was very well organized, covering everything from the basics to the most advanced knowledge. He reflects that he was always good at theory in his past life, and that helped him understand everything. The young man admits he found learning so fun that he stayed up late reading without noticing. Erika's jaw drops as the material is difficult, and she wonders how Will isn't a failure. She then panics, thinking she'll be the worst in the class, and begs him not to abandon her. Our protagonist calms her down and says he will teach her everything she can't understand. With a big smile, he says they are friends and therefore should always help each other. The young woman is moved by the young man's attitude and thanks him with tears of happiness. Will thinks that having Erika around could be good for his future plans at the academy. Right after, he asks for a favor in return, and Erika remembers that the next class is offensive magic. Erika says this is the class he never passed, but now he can since he beat Opus. But our protagonist denies it, saying he still can't use general offensive magic. However, the young man reveals with a very confident look that he has an idea to solve this. Because of this, he asks for Erika's help to put his new plan into practice in class. Later in the training yard, the students are gathered for practical class. Our protagonist thinks that offensive magic is divided into two types: general and unique. General magic is based on pre-made formulas that anyone can learn and use. Unique magic, on the other hand, is created by the user themselves and can only be used by its developer. He reflects that the Academy teaches both types and that he can use his healing for unique magic. So, he can participate in unique magic classes, but general magic classes are the problem. The professor glares at him and says he can't pass if he can't use offensive magic. Mockingly, the man says that theory is easy, but practice is another story and he will fail. Faced with the provocation, our protagonist simply replies yes, with a very determined look. The man then announces that the task is the same as before: hit a target with a fireball. He then warns that if the young man can't do the basics, he will never graduate. The professor thinks that in the fight, Will used healing magic to enhance his movements. However, he is sure that the young man can't use offensive magic and therefore wants him out. The man wishes with a malicious smile that the incompetent kid would just get out of his class. Suddenly, the professor notices the confident smile on the young man's face and becomes very suspicious. His eyes widen in pure shock as he simply can't believe what he's seeing. Our protagonist creates a fireball, and the man shouts, asking how that's possible. With a victorious smile, the young man thinks that fortunately, his plan wasn't discovered by anyone. Right after, we see a flashback showing what happened before the class started. The plan was quite simple. Erika would create the fireball using her general offensive magic. Our protagonist would then place the flame inside a salamander's tail. He then hides the tail in his hand and heals it to prevent it from burning, while Erika looks worried. The girl is shocked by his ability and wonders who he really is. He explains that before releasing the magic, he activates the tail with healing to make it seem like he created it. With that, our protagonist launches the fireball with all his strength towards the target. The attack hits the training dummy dead on with impressive force. With a victorious smile, our protagonist turns and asks the professor what he thought. The man is shocked but thinks the magic was real and wonders if the young man learned it. He then says the young man passed the class, and Will thanks him with a smile. Erika is overjoyed with the result, while the other students are shocked by the scene. But Opus has an expression of pure rage and refuses to accept defeat. Later, he storms into the room and yells at the professor, asking what just happened. The man replies that he wants to know too, but Opus says that doesn't matter to him. The blonde says he can't stand a healer challenging him and threatens to tell his father everything. Because of this, the professor is terrified by the threat and tries to reason with the young man. Opus then orders the man to get our protagonist out of his sight, one way or another. The bully then leaves, leaving the professor alone with the difficult mission. The man thinks that doing something outside of class is risky, and remembers how he fought to be there. He reflects that he needs to take a risk to protect his position and what others will think. He then decides he won't have his life ruined and will solve the problem himself. After class on the training field, the professor calls Will over and asks why he summoned him there. The man says our protagonist seems very confident and Will thanks him, but the professor denies it's a compliment. He then accuses him of getting carried away and skipping classes and asks how the young man will make up for it. Our protagonist gets annoyed because he knows the professor himself is to blame for all of it. He explains that he studied with his classmates and on his own, so there shouldn't be any problem for him. However, the professor says it's not the young man who decides and that absences require mandatory extra classes. The man then explains that the content of the extra class is decided by the instructor in charge. With a malicious smile, he reveals that the class will be a simulated battle against himself. Our protagonist is surprised and questions the idea of a fight between a professor and a student. The man says he'll give him an advantage if the young man lands a single hit, he'll pass. He then taunts him, asking if the young man will run away after being given such a good chance. Our protagonist thinks that with the professor's magic, his attacks will never reach him. He understands that the plan is to humiliate him so that he realizes the power difference and obeys. Faced with the situation, our protagonist accepts the challenge and firmly says he will fight. Because of this, the professor gives a very malicious smile, his eyes shining sinisterly. Without wasting time, the professor shouts for the fight to begin and immediately launches his magic at the ground. Our protagonist remembers seeing this magic from the man before in another class. The spell then causes the ground to rise and charge towards the young man. A giant pillar of earth then flies at high speed towards the young man. Our protagonist is surprised by the speed and narrowly dodges the attack. With great effort, he manages to slide across the ground to avoid a direct hit. The young man is shocked by the speed and power of the professor's attack. Because of this, the earth pillar crashes into the ground with a huge impact. The man mocks him, asking what the problem is since Will can only dodge his blows. The young man realizes that the professor is on a completely different level than Ulpus. But he thinks that despite all that, it's still not impossible to dodge. He then uses his speed to dodge several earth spikes. He runs towards the professor while dodging the continuous attacks. The young man then touches the ground and creates his own healing magic circle. Our protagonist advances between the pillars, preparing for a counterattack. The professor creates a giant wall of earth to defend himself from the young man's attack. With a malicious smile, he thinks the young man has no chance against his defense. But our protagonist leaps over the wall with a sword, surprising the man. He then prepares an attack with the blade, which glows with an intense blue energy. The professor then uses a spell to create a stone armor around his body. Our protagonist's sword strikes the armor, but it's too hard and doesn't break. Because of this, the impact throws the young man back, unable to harm his opponent. The man mocks him, saying his strength will never break his iron like armor. He continues the mockery, saying that using healing to attack is a very cheap imitation. Our protagonist gets up and calls out to the professor to explain his real plan. He says he studied the human body and learned that people limit their own strength. The young man continues, explaining that the body would break if it used all its power at once. Will says he's not making excuses and tells the professor to pay close attention to him. He rolls up his sleeves and explains that even if he unleashes his power, his body can't handle it. But with a smile, he says that since he's a healer, he doesn't care if his arm breaks. The professor is completely shocked and starts to sweat, seeing the young man's confidence. Desperately, he stammers that it won't break his armor, but Will says they'll find out. The young man then prepares himself and concentrates an enormous amount of energy in his fist. Faced with the overwhelming power, the professor panics and screams in fear. With a war cry, our protagonist lands a powerful punch on the man's armor. Because of this, the professor is thrown to the ground, completely defeated and bleeding. Will then says it's not right for a professor to decide the limits of his own students. He reflects that when Veronica gave him the idea to use healing to attack, he felt it was the right path. With that, the young man realizes he can become much stronger from that moment on. Our protagonist looks at his fist with new determination as his power has evolved. Suddenly, the ground shakes and a new wall of earth rises, coming towards him. The young man falls to his knees exhausted, while the professor gets up, looking angry. The man adjusts his glasses with a furious look, and a dark aura surrounds him, ready for a fight. Our protagonist then reminds the professor that if he landed a single hit, he would pass. But the man yells furiously that there are no witnesses, and that he won't keep his promise. He refuses to accept that a healer hit him and prepares a new earth attack. A huge stone spike then rushes towards our protagonist. Will, however, smiles and comments that removing his limiters isn't just for punching. He then concentrates his magic into his feet, and a green aura begins to envelop him. With absurd speed, the young man narrowly dodges the earth pillar coming his way. The professor is completely shocked by the young man's speed and can't believe what he's seeing. Right after, our protagonist appears in front of him and says his armor won't have time to form. The man glares at him with a serious look, realizing he underestimated the young healer. The professor's eyes glow with a purple light as he tries to understand the situation. He's confused because the young man's fist suddenly stopped right in front of his face. Soon after, the man realizes that his own body is also completely paralyzed. He then understands that the flow of time around them has suddenly slowed down drastically. With great effort, our protagonist holds back, as the power he used is very dangerous. The professor feels the pain of the punch, which seems endless and continues without stopping. He realizes the pain is several times worse than a normal punch would be. Because of this, he can't bear the pain and can't run or scream. The man can only wish for it all to be over as quickly as possible. With that, the punch finally lands and time returns to normal, sending him flying. The man then crashes to the ground, completely defeated and unresponsive. Will welcomes him back and says that to him, It all seemed like just an instant. The man gets up and asks what that was, and our protagonist offers to explain. He explains that at the moment of the punch, he used a sensory enhancement spell. Originally, the magic is for healing, but he uses it to increase his reaction time in combat. Thus, the professor's senses became so sharp that 1 second felt like 1,000. Our protagonist then asks if he now understands how painful it was to be hit like that. With a smile, he asks if the professor will let him pass the extra class now. The man reluctantly agrees, but the young man says he has one more thing to say. He warns him that if the professor dares to stand in his way, things will get ugly. With a terrifying look, he warns that the professor will learn the consequences the hard way. The man is terrified as our protagonist says he just wants to attend class in peace. With a very innocent smile, the young man asks if the professor will grant his request. The sun then sets on the academy, marking the end of another school day. Soon after, the professor walks alone through the hallways, wondering who that young man is. He used to think all healers were weak and should obey attack mages. But our protagonist is different, with his fighting ability and overwhelming willpower. Suddenly, Opus appears in the hallway and approaches the still shaken professor. The blonde asks if the young man's extra training is over, hoping he failed. He thinks with a malicious smile that Will is one step closer to being expelled. Out of nowhere, the professor explodes and yells at Opus, telling him to shut his mouth right now. With a furious look, he warns the young man not to mess with our protagonist anymore. The man says it's for his own good and that thinking of Will as a simple healer is a mistake. Opus gets angry and tries to threaten the professor, saying he'll tell his father everything. However, the man simply tells him to go ahead and do whatever he wants with that information. The young man is confused, and the professor says that if he had that much influence, he'd have him expelled. The man continues, saying it's more likely that Will show his claws to them in the future. The professor then leaves, leaving Opus alone in the hallway to think about it. The blonde then slams his fist on his room door, completely frustrated and angry. With a cry of rage, he curses the situation because his plan to get rid of Will failed. A few days later, our protagonist closes his textbook at the end of another class. With that, he stretches in his chair and celebrates the peace he has finally achieved at the academy. The young man thinks that the professor warned Opus, because the blonde just glares at him but does nothing. He's happy to be able to focus on his classes, but knows he can't get complacent. Our protagonist remembers the dark future and knows he needs to get stronger to change it. He reflects that using healing to enhance his body is good, but it's still very limited in combat. Besides, the sensory enhancement is only good for intimidation, and he needs a new way to fight. Suddenly, we see him talking to someone and asking what they think of his ideas. The camera reveals he's talking to Professor Veronica, who is looking at him seriously. Before he finishes, Veronica interrupts him and asks to say one little thing first. Our protagonist agrees and asks the professor what she means by that. With a smile, the young woman congratulates Will on all his progress so far. The professor explains that he has become the talk among the academy's teachers, but she comments that many of the other instructors don't seem very happy about it. The young man asks if she's hiding the fact that she helped him, but the young woman says she doesn't talk much with the others. Our protagonist then realizes that Professor Veronica is also a bit of an outcast there. He feels relieved and thanks her, as he didn't want to cause any trouble for the young woman. The professor tells him not to worry, and that she's actually the one who's grateful. She then remembers that healers, by nature, don't usually put this theory into practice. Right after, the young woman draws her sword, which glows with a very intense energy. She reveals she was curious to see how a healer who actually fights would fare. Our protagonist is terrified by the situation and asks what she's doing. The professor explains that she wants to know his level, since the young man wants advice on how to get stronger. Will tries to argue, but the young woman says there's no time to wait on the battlefield. Without waiting, the professor charges straight at our protagonist. The young man grits his teeth and prepares for the combat that is about to begin. The professor then attacks with her sword, and Will defends against the blow with his dagger. He uses all his strength to hold back the powerful professor's attack. The two then exchange several blows at an impressive speed in the courtyard. Our protagonist thinks that even with his magic, he can barely keep up with the young woman. He notices her movements are refined, and she attacks without any pause. Because of this, the young man realizes that pushing his abilities has a limit. He understands he'll only get one chance to attack with a speed she hasn't seen. He then decides he needs to catch her by surprise with an unexpected move. With that, he uses his magic to make a gigantic leap over the professor. The young woman is surprised by the maneuver and watches the young man flying through the sky. In the air, our protagonist prepares for the attack with the sword he took from her. But the professor manages to defend against the blow with incredible speed. Our protagonist glares at her with a determined look because he has another plan. The dagger he was using shatters and falls to the ground from the impact of the blow. With that, our protagonist laughs because the blade couldn't handle the power. The professor then sheathes her sword, acknowledging the young man's skill. She says she's impressed, as she didn't expect him to force her to use her magic sword. Veronica comments that among offensive mages his age, his skill is one of the best. The young woman likes his ambition and realizes that physical enhancement alone doesn't satisfy him. Will agrees and says that no matter how much he removes his limiters, there's a limit to what he can do. She then advises him, saying that healing magic must have other applications besides strengthening the body. The professor explains that to turn ideas into reality, the feeling of real combat is crucial. The young man agrees and remembers how much he learned just in that short fight they had. He then asks if he should continue training with her, but the young woman has another idea. She reveals there will be a monster subjugation training, and the young man is shocked by the news. The event brings together the Offensive Magic Academy, the famous Schwarz Academy, which is his, the Healing Magic Academy, Heilig Academy, where he was originally supposed to go, and finally the Zilbern Fencing Academy, completing the 3 great schools of the kingdom. In the event, students from each academy form groups to complete real subjugation missions. So, in this life he will defeat the monsters and change the tragic future of destruction. With a confident smile, our protagonist declares that this will be his first monster subjugation. The professor watches him with a serious expression on her face and her arms crossed in the courtyard. But she warns that to participate, he first needs to prove his skill in a selection exam. The young woman reveals that among the first-year students, there is someone who is called a prodigy. Faced with the situation, she challenges him to aim for first place among all his classmates. Our protagonist then asks how the exam works, and Veronica says the candidates fight each other. With that, the young man thinks that this school is all about fighting, since out of 100 volunteers, only a few are chosen. He remembers that at his old academy, anyone could join and concludes that this is the nature of Schwarz. The young man then has a memory of his old master and wonders what he's doing now. The professor warns him that there's a prodigy who has already surpassed some teachers, so it won't be easy. Curious, our protagonist asks Veronica if she has ever met this so-called prodigy student. The young woman says the young man avoids the teachers, and Will thinks that actually, everyone is afraid of her. Even so, the professor assures him he can relax because she will help him train herself. Our protagonist gets super excited about the news and accepts her help with great enthusiasm. Soon, the day of the selection exam arrives, and the test will be in a gigantic battle arena. The young man walks through the place, thinking about how quickly time has passed and now it's the moment of truth. With a determined look, he reflects that he has done all the preparation and now just needs to fight with everything he's got. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls his name, making the young man turn to see who it is. To his surprise, it's the academy director himself, Mr. Arnold Gallagran, who appears. The man greets him and asks about his granddaughter, and our protagonist says she's doing well. The director apologizes for not visiting him sooner and imagines the young man has gone through difficulties. Our protagonist smiles and says he struggled at the beginning, but now everything is perfectly fine. With that, he reveals that his goal is first place, and the director is very pleased with the news. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears and says that this whole thing is a very bad joke. The muscular man scoffs, questioning how a weakling like Will could dream of first place. This is Bode, the training supervisor, and he says he needs to teach our protagonist a lesson. Our protagonist looks at him seriously, as he remembers meeting him in his past life. A memory shows that Bode was a first-class attack mage in the Great War. The young man thinks he doesn't have fond memories of him as the man grabs him by the shirt collar. With a look of contempt, he says that fighting is a world of talent, and that training doesn't change that. He then yells that because he's a healer, our protagonist has no chance of winning. Will, however, doesn't flinch and stares back with a look of pure determination and anger. The director then intervenes and says not to argue, as the exam will show the truth. But Bode warns that the young man will have to deal with this serious guy, who seems to be very strong. At that moment, a young man with silver hair appears, and our protagonist becomes tense. This is Sirius Bluenote, the famous prodigy of the Offensive Magic Academy. Our protagonist looks at him seriously, as he knows he is his greatest rival. He understands that to reach the top, he will have to defeat the silver-haired young man. The two then stare at each other in a tense and rival-filled silence. The director breaks the tension and says it's time to start the exam. All the students then head to the entrance of the great battle arena. Soon after, the 100 volunteers gather in the center of the arena for the test. Our protagonist looks around and sees several familiar faces among the participants. He is surprised to see Erica there, and the girl explains she'll lose her allowance if she doesn't fight. On the other side, the bully Opus and his friends stare at him with a look of pure mockery. Our protagonist laughs at his friend's situation and says her circumstances are quite tough. The director then gives a speech, saying he's proud of so many volunteers this year. He then announces that the first phase will be a preliminary survival round. The young man thinks that fighting with 100 people there will be quite cramped, but Sirius smiles confidently. But the director tells them not to worry and strikes his staff on the ground, creating a magic circle. Suddenly, a gigantic spell transports all the students to a completely different place. The young people are shocked as the ground transforms into a starry sky right before their eyes. The director then raises his staff, which glows with a very strong golden light. Using his power, he announces that this will be the new battlefield for the selection exam. Right after, our protagonist appears alone in the middle of a dense, unknown forest. He looks around and wonders if this place is the forest behind the academy. The director's voice then explains that everyone was randomly teleported throughout the area. He says they can fight or hide, but Erica has already run into a monster. The director warns that the starting position depends on luck, and Sirius seems to have gotten a good one. Our protagonist is impressed by the absurd magic of teleporting so many people at once. The man's voice then officially declares the start of the selection exam for everyone. Without wasting time, our protagonist decides on his first move in the forest. He then climbs a tree to get a better view of the terrain and hide from others. The young man uses his healing magic to suppress his presence and hide from nearby enemies. However, he notices a movement and quickly turns, having sensed someone approaching. From above, our protagonist observes a scuffle going on between 3 other students nearby. One of the young men summons a stone golem and orders the giant creature to attack his opponents. With that, a girl with a giant magic hammer charges at the golem with full force. Meanwhile, another student casts a blizzard to help immobilize the stone monster. Will thinks this is a great chance to see various spells and believes it would be a waste to just pass. With a smile, he notices one of the spells and decides he really wants to learn how to use it too. The student with the golem celebrates, standing, while the other 2 are down on the forest floor. He then brags that he just defeated 2 opponents with the strength of his golem. Suddenly, our protagonist appears behind him and says with a smile that he saw the whole thing. Without the young man noticing, Will places a hand on his face to use a new ability. Right after, he activates a consciousness, blocking spell with a golden light. With that, the opponent's eyes roll back, and he faints instantly, unable to react. The young man then falls hard to the ground, completely knocked out and out of the fight. Our protagonist thinks he can manipulate the flow of life to make the target pass out. He reflects that he can incapacitate the enemy without harming them, but needs to grab their head. The young man is happy because the technique he created with Professor Veronica worked well. Suddenly, he senses a presence and his face turns serious as he perceives a new danger. Faced with the situation, he quickly dodges several swords flying in his direction. Soon after, the blades merge to form a giant sword, and he recognizes the magic. Our protagonist then takes a deep breath, tired of this endless chase. Opus appears, and the young man says the bully doesn't seem to have learned his lesson yet. Opus says he doesn't know what the young man is talking about and just wants to pass the exam. He then orders his friends to use all their power since it's a 3-on-1 fight. The blonde then uses his knife creation magic to attack our protagonist. With that, one of his friends uses a spell to enchant the blades with a deadly poison. Immediately after, the other companion uses shadow magic to duplicate all the daggers. Opus brags that the knives are poisonous, and that Will won't be able to dodge all of them. Because of this, a shower of poisoned blades flies straight towards our protagonist. The young man thinks the poison can be cured, but it will be difficult to withstand the attack without getting hurt. Even so, he prepares to fight back and creates a sphere of healing energy in his hand. With a strong stump on the ground, our protagonist prepares to use a new ability. To Opus's shock, the golem he defeated earlier appears and protects him from the daggers. The bully screams in desperation and disbelief, wondering what that creature is. The stone monster then positions itself in front of the young man to defend him from the attack. Our protagonist explains that healing magic only works on living beings like that golem. He then says he can give it vitality and control the creature using his new technique. With that, the golem charges forward and attacks the 3 bullies without any mercy. The stone creature lands a powerful punch on one of Opus's friends. Immediately after, the monster knocks the other companion to the ground and easily immobilizes him. Opus yells at his friends, telling them not to be defeated so easily. Suddenly, our protagonist appears in front of the blonde, who is shocked by his speed. With no time to react, the young man places his hand on the bully's face to use his technique. With a smile, our protagonist tells Opus to sleep well and knocks him out instantly. Elsewhere, the golem fights against other students and defends against a girl's ice attack. Our protagonist thinks the golem compensates for his weaknesses and allows him to observe other magics. He then carefully watches every move and spell of all his colleagues. Suddenly, a giant tornado appears in the forest, furiously destroying everything in its path. Our protagonist is startled by the power and wonders what is happening. The tornado then charges forward, relentlessly uprooting trees. The young man has to jump far away to avoid being caught by the destructive wind. With that, the tornado carves a straight path through the forest, leading to the distant academy. Because of this, the golem and the other students are thrown far away and defeated by the wind. Our protagonist is then left standing in the middle of the destruction caused by that power. Soon after, he looks down the cleared path and sees a mysterious figure in the distance. The young man recognizes him as Sirius the Prodigy and admits his skill is impressive. Faced with the situation, our protagonist prepares to fight and test his strength against him. But a voice announces that's enough, and that the time for the preliminary round is over. The director then reveals that the 4 remaining students are the ones who passed the exam. He then announces that the main competition will be tomorrow and activates the teleportation magic. Our protagonist and Sirius are the last to be teleported and stare at each other from a distance. The prodigy looks at him with a very cold and challenging gaze, showing his rivalry. Will gives a smile and thinks that it seems his rival can't wait until tomorrow. The destruction around them shows just how powerful the magic used in the test was. Later in his room, our protagonist prepares by writing in a textbook. He wonders what he should do before the main selection to get stronger. Suddenly, a voice from the other side of the door asks if what Ulpus did wasn't enough. Ulpus's friends comment that our protagonist is strong and even healed them after the fight. The blonde gets furious and yells that his family doesn't tolerate being underestimated by a healer. Soon after, he becomes worried, wondering what his father will say if he finds out. His companions exchange nervous glances and seem very uncomfortable with the situation. The 2 young men then give up and say they don't want to get hurt for him anymore. With that, they turn their backs and leave, leaving the bully alone in the hallway. Ulpus then gets furious and says there's a way to get rid of Will without using magic. Meanwhile, our protagonist continues studying in his room, oblivious to everything. Suddenly, someone knocks on our protagonist's door, surprising him. He gets up suspiciously and wonders who it could be at this time of night at the academy. With a bad feeling, the young man opens the door and peeks to see who is on the other side. To his surprise, it's Ulpus, who greets him with a very strange and creepy smile. Will asks what he's planning, but the blonde says he just wants to talk peacefully with him. Right after, the bully admits he hates healers and tried everything to get him expelled. But the young man remembers that our protagonist turned the tables on every attempt he made before. With a sinister smile, the blonde says he should have been more direct from the get-go. He then tells Will to leave the academy with a very threatening and hateful look. Our protagonist asks why so much hatred, and Ulpus questions if he needs a reason to hate healers. He explains that in his family, healers are sent away, and his older brother was one of them. A memory shows his brother being made fun of by everyone, but he just smiled like an idiot. Ulpus thinks that attack mages and pathetic healers are not alike at all. Our protagonist understands that this is an old and ingrained teaching in noble families. Because of this, Ulpus says that once he understands that, he will leave, because this is no place for him. Our protagonist then asks if the bully thinks he will give up that easily. With a sinister smile, Ulpus says he will make him give up and threatens him by mentioning his family. Will doesn't understand the threat and glares at the blonde with a look of pure rage and confusion. Ulpus then reveals that he had him investigated and knows he was raised only with his sister. He then blackmails him, saying that if he gives the order, something could happen to the girl. The blonde pressures him, asking if he has made up his mind, and our protagonist confirms that he has. But when Ulpus tells him to pack his bags, Will grabs him by the neck with great force. Right after, our protagonist lands a powerful punch, sending the bully to the ground. Without wasting time, the young man gets on top of the blonde and firmly holds his arm. He then begins to twist Ulpus's limb, who screams in pain nonstop. Our protagonist calmly says that he already told him he had made his final decision. The bully continues to scream desperately on the floor, begging him to stop. The blonde is left panting and crying in pain from his broken arm. He then threatens him, saying his father and the academy won't let this slide. But Will shows the healed arm and says there's no problem because he already healed it himself. Ulpus is completely confused and asks what our protagonist is trying to do to him. But without warning, the young man breaks his arm again, and the blonde screams in desperate pain. He then continues to twist the bully's limb, who begs for mercy on the floor. With a smile, our protagonist uses his magic to heal the blonde's arm once more. Immediately after, he breaks the limb again, and the bully begs him to stop. The young man says his determination isn't weak, and that he doesn't forgive threats against his sister. With a terrifying look, he swears he won't forgive him until his spirit is broken. Ulpus is terrified on the floor and wonders what kind of person our protagonist is. The blonde thinks he's a demon in a healer's skin, and that this is worse than anything. Night falls over the academy, and our protagonist wishes the bully a good night. As he leaves, the young man reminds him of his promise not to mess with him, leaving Ulpus traumatized. Back in his room, our protagonist feels refreshed and prepares for the next day. He knows the main tournament is about to begin and watches the arena from a distance. In the seats of honor, director Arnila Golagran watches everything with a very serious expression. Beside him are Supervisor Bode and Professor Veronica, who are also watching the event. The director announces that the 4 finalists will fight in a 1-on-1 tournament, surprising Will. His first opponent is Erica, who gets very nervous facing her friend in the arena. The girl explains that she defended herself with walls of fire, and our protagonist finds that very rare. He then wonders how a retreat tactic brought her this far in the competition. The young woman asks him to take it easy since they're friends, but the young man denies the request on the spot. With that, the girl becomes determined to fight for a better evaluation and prepares for combat. Right after, the referee shouts for the fight to begin, and the two face each other in the arena. Without wasting time, Erica begins to prepare a powerful flame magic in her hands. She then launches a gigantic wave of fire towards our protagonist. The attack hits the young man head-on, but he remains standing in the middle of the flames. He thinks the spell is weak and his healing can easily handle the damage. Our protagonist then prepares to fight back but realizes something is wrong. Suddenly, the flames become much more intense, and he perceives the real danger. Our protagonist notices the flames are different and that there's something very strange about them. But Erica shouts with determination that she will keep attacking with everything she has, non-stop. With that, the powerful fire attack continues to hit the young man head-on in the battle arena. Will then notices that the flames don't go out and wonders if this is Erica's unique magic. Her firepower is normal, but the abnormal duration of the magic makes it much more dangerous. Our protagonist remembers that the fire from a salamander's tail also lasted a long time. He understands that it wasn't just the item, but Erica's traits that influenced the magic. The young man thinks that her tactic of creating a wall of fire is a very rare strategy. He then understands that the magic reflects the girl's persistent personality. Suddenly, the crowd starts shouting and cheering for the young woman to defeat the healer. Erica is surprised by the support and starts to think that maybe she can actually win the fight. Full of confidence, the young woman tells her opponent to surrender, but mistakenly calls him Ulpus. Will just smiles and says he can put out the fire if he increases his healing magic. The girl, however, doesn't give up and launches another wave of fire with even more force. With a smile, our protagonist thinks that if the fire doesn't go out, he'll try something else. With that, he decides he will use her flames to attack instead of defending. Erica is completely shocked to realize the young man is using her fire as a weapon. Without wasting time, our protagonist charges forward with his fists ablaze towards his opponent. The girl is paralyzed with surprise, unable to react to the young man's counterattack. Immediately after, he hits her squarely with a fiery punch and tells her to give up the fight. Because of this, the young woman falls hard to the ground, completely defeated by the young man's blow. The referee then announces the winner of the fight, but mistakenly says Ulpus's name. Our protagonist thinks that even if he wins, the evaluation of healers won't change. But Erica yells at him and forbids him from giving up if he still considers himself an offensive mage. Soon after, the young woman gets embarrassed and apologizes, saying she was in support mode. Will reassures her and says she doesn't need to worry, because she fought very well in the arena. He then uses his healing magic and says there's still a chance for her to pass. The young woman is moved by his attitude and for a moment mistakes him for the bully Ulpus. Suddenly, Supervisor Bode appears and grabs the girl, saying her chance is over. Our protagonist glares at the man while the young woman screams in terror, asking for his help. Bode points to the young man and tells him to think carefully about the situation. He continues, saying that healers are complete trash and are useless for anything. With that, the man scoffs at Erica for giving up against trash like the young man. He then tells the girl to get out of there because she failed the exam. Our protagonist then questions if it's right for a professor to talk to his students like that. The man says that as a supervisor, he needs to reprimand the weak participants of the test. The man then turns his back and prepares to leave the battle arena. But he stops and says that this year, it seems there is only one approved candidate in the exam. Suddenly, Sirius appears behind our protagonist and says that this is very annoying. The young man is surprised and Sirius tells him to speak up so he can hear him properly. Our protagonist then asks if the prodigy thinks the same as Supervisor Bode. The young man says that strength is everything, and because the professor is strong, he's right in what he says. Our protagonist scratches his head and replies that he understands his point of view, but he states that in his opinion, Sirius himself is not weak at all. The prodigy then says that's why he wants to be the one who's right in the end. Our protagonist faces his opponent with a serious and determined look. This is Sirius Bluenote, the famous prodigy of the academy who masters wind magic. He remembers that in his past life, he heard of a strong mage who was the same age. The wind the prodigy creates is so strong that it doesn't allow anyone to get close to him. Because of this, his power destroys everything in its path and leaves nothing behind. With that, the silver-haired young man prepares for the next fight with complete calm. The next battle of the finals is then announced, and it will be between Ulpus and Sirius. Our protagonist thinks that because of Bode's attitude, he won't be recognized unless he wins. With a smile, he guarantees he will win, and Sirius agrees with the young man's determination. Right after, the final of the selection exam begins, and the referee shouts for the fight to start. Without wasting time, Sirius begins to create a whirlwind of wind around his feet. A gigantic tornado then forms and charges straight towards his opponent. Our protagonist struggles not to be swept away by the wind coming his way. He then uses his magic to anchor himself to the ground, which begins to crack under the force. However, the tornado's power is so great that he ends up being thrown into the air with no chance. Sirius watches him with a very cold and calculating gaze as he controls the tornado. Because of this, the tornado tosses our protagonist from side to side relentlessly. Soon after, the young man falls hard to the arena floor with a great impact. As he gets up, he realizes that the wind barrier prevents him from getting close to his rival. The two then stare at each other in a tense and rival-filled silence in the arena. Our protagonist struggles to withstand the wind and thinks how fast and painful the attack is. Sirius then prepares a new blast of wind with a sphere of energy in his hand. Immediately after, an even stronger gale is fired towards our hero. Will notices that unlike the tornado, this magic blows over a much wider area. Faced with the situation, he knows he'll be thrown out and prepares his own green magic. The young man then decides it's time for his new technique to finally make its debut. With that, he touches the arena floor, and a small plant begins to sprout out of nowhere. In the blink of an eye, the small plant grows and transforms into a giant forest. In the audience, Erica is shocked and wonders if that is also a type of healing magic. The girl looks at the enormous tree and thinks her friend has gotten even stronger again. Our protagonist then looks up and asks what Professor Veronica thought of that. At that moment, a single leaf falls slowly from the canopy of the giant tree in the arena. The leaf then lands on the professor's head, who is very surprised by the whole situation. The young man explains that he infused vital energy into the plant to make it grow rapidly. Will finishes by saying he learned about plant magic and can adapt his tactics. Suddenly, our protagonist's face turns pale and he starts to sweat profusely. Soon after, he faints and Professor Veronica catches him to prevent him from falling. The young woman asks if he's okay and Will says yes, but it was mana exhaustion. He laughs awkwardly and comments that the book didn't say the technique was so powerful. The professor says it was as she expected, and the young man is confused. She explains that destroying is easier than healing, and healing magic consumes more mana. Our protagonist understands that he needs to choose the right moment to use his ability. Back in the arena, he thinks this is the moment and that he will overcome his disadvantage. Sirius then prepares a new wind attack with his arm extended forward. The prodigy then cuts the tree in half with a blade of wind. Our protagonist is surprised because he didn't know an attack like that existed. He remembers his rival's attacks, like the tornado and the cutting wind blades. Will thinks that Sirius's magic is powerful and seamless, living up to his fame. But our protagonist clenches his fist, having decided to get stronger with his own magic. He then charges straight at his opponent to continue the fight. Sirius creates a wind barrier and says that no matter how many times the young man tries, he will never reach him. With that, the wind throws our protagonist back with great force and no chance to fight back. Even so, our protagonist gives a little smile because he has a plan to counterattack. The prodigy is confused by the reaction and wonders what his opponent is planning to do. Suddenly, a giant root erupts from the ground and hits the silver-haired young man from behind. The root then wraps around the prodigy's leg, who wonders what it is. Will explains that his tornado doesn't protect the ground and that the plant grows underground. The prodigy feels the pain in his shoulder and realizes he was injured by the opponent's surprise attack. Our protagonist then questions if he's worried about Supervisor Bode in the audience. In the stands, the man watches the fight with his arms crossed and a very serious expression. The young man comments that the professor is strong and that even without learning from him, Sirius comes from a famous family. Sirius then reveals that in his family, magical ability is all that truly matters. He continues, explaining that the strongest becomes the leader, and everyone is an enemy in the succession. Because of this, he says that obeying the professor is the best way to get stronger. Soon after, the prodigy asks if the conversation is over because his shoulder is hurting a lot. In the stands, Erica and the other students are shocked by the power of the fight, but our protagonist faces his opponent with a confident smile. With that, Sirius summons a giant wind dragon and says he will settle the fight. The energy monster then advances and Will realizes his rival is Sirius. The young man reflects that he thought offensive mages had it easy, but he was wrong. He understands that having talent doesn't make anyone superior, and that here, everyone is equal. With a smile, our protagonist says that's why he decided he will defeat Sirius. The prodigy asks what kind of declaration that is, but Will says he's just talking to himself. He then touches the ground and says he will use a very special seed to fight. Immediately after, a giant plant begins to grow from the arena floor. Before everyone's eyes, an enormous tree called Yggdrasil appears out of nowhere. Our protagonist explains that this plant consumes more mana to grow so quickly, but the more mana he puts in, the more the tree continues to grow non-stop. With that, Sirius launches his wind dragon with full force towards the tree. The energy monster then wraps around the giant plant to destroy it. Despite his injured shoulder, Sirius just watches the situation with a very calm expression. The giant tree is uprooted from the ground and thrown far away by the dragon's force. With that, the enormous plant flies through the arena skies as if it weighed nothing. The prodigy then notices something, and his eye glows with a very intense blue light. To his shock, the tree wasn't destroyed and continues to grow non-stop in the arena. Our protagonist explains that the plant has high vitality and grows from a single branch. Sirius then realizes that by attacking with full force, his defense was left wide open. Several gigantic roots then erupt from the ground and advance towards him. With that, the giant roots crush Sirius to the ground, leaving him with no chance to fight back. Our protagonist then points his dagger at his opponent, who is immobilized on the arena floor. Faced with the situation, the prodigy admits his defeat and says our hero won the fight. The referee then announces loudly that the grand winner of the exam is our protagonist, Will. In the stands, the students are jaw-dropped, wondering how the healer won. Lying on the ground, the silver-haired young man remains with an expression of pure frustration. Will praises him for being a prodigy, but Sirius says that's not enough for him. Our protagonist is confused because he doesn't understand what he means since the fight was great. Suddenly, a dark voice says it's very disappointed with what just happened. Immediately after, a purple energy explosion erupts from the audience with frightening power. The dark attack then hits Sirius head-on, who has no way to defend himself. Supervisor Bode appears in the arena and lands a powerful kick right next to the prodigy. Without any gentleness, the man grabs him by the shirt collar as if he were nothing. Bode says the young man failed, and that his training will start over from scratch because of this. In the audience, the other students watch the scene and comment on how terrifying it is. The man then yells at the other students in the stands. He says that a generation where a healer wins is a big joke. Faced with the situation, everyone in the audience falls silent, very afraid of the man. Our protagonist then questions if the supervisor isn't going too far with this. He defends Sirius, saying the fight was close and that the prodigy wasn't weak. But the man tells the young man to shut up with a look of pure fury and a dark aura. He then scoffs at words like, good fight, or lot of potential for the future. The supervisor yells that on the battlefield, strength is what really matters in the end. He continues, saying that if you lose, you're treated like trash and end up getting taken out. Our protagonist is shocked to see how the man treats his own disciple there. He then argues that he proved his strength, and that being a healer is no reason for this. But the man glares at him with a terrifying look and questions our protagonist's level. Bode claims that talent is cruel, and that soon the young man will hit his limit and become weak. He points out that his mana is more depleted than Sirius's, surprising Will. The man finishes by saying that the weak on the battlefield only get in the way. Our protagonist reflects on the word dead weight that the supervisor used. He has a flashback of when Bode grabbed him and called him useless trash. In this memory, a soldier calls for the supervisor in a room with other warriors. Will tries to explain that healers support everyone with their healing magic. He says it's a division of labor, and if they don't work together, humanity will disappear. The muscular man just listens to all of it in silence with a serious expression. He then says that his disciple stayed on the front lines, so everyone could escape. But he reveals that the others were defeated by weak monsters at the escape point. Because of this, his disciple ended up gone, with no safe place to return to. The man laments not being able to stay on the battlefield, and not being able to heal him. With a look of pure hatred, he wonders why his disciple had to be lost for the sake of trash. Back in the present, he yells furiously why Sirius should be lost for trash like him. Will thinks that Bode isn't wrong, because in the end, if you're weak, you can't do anything. He then understands that to change the future, he needs to fight with his own hands. He knows a dark time will come and the monsters will become even more violent. Our protagonist clenches his fist and thinks that the strong can't be selfish when things get worse. With that, he declares that people without talent also need to fight and challenges him to a fight right there. Supervisor Bode gives a very malicious smile, accepting our protagonist's challenge on the spot. He then tells the other instructor to take the trash serious and get out of the arena. The man looks worried, but Bode yells that for this exam, he's the one who makes the rules. The instructor then carries the young prodigy out of the battle arena. Our protagonist faces the situation with a look of pure determination on his face. The instructor looks very tired as he leaves with Sirius unconscious in his arms. A special match between the supervisor and Will is then announced to everyone. Immediately after, the fight begins and Bode cracks his knuckles, preparing for the attack. He yells that he will prove how low the young man's level is and creates a purple energy sphere. With low mana, our protagonist faces Bode, who is now his strongest opponent yet. He knows he can't win a normal fight, so he prepares a healing spell as his first move. However, Bode is too fast and appears in front of him, saying the young man is too slow to attack. Our protagonist is completely shocked because he didn't even see the supervisor's movement. Right after, the man unleashes a gigantic lightning explosion with simply overwhelming power. Because of this, the entire arena is destroyed, and our hero is thrown far away by the force of the impact. Bode then brags and says he will teach him the 3 reasons why his victory is absolute. He explains that his range, his speed, and his power to finish in one blow make him invincible. With a mocking tone, the man turns and asks if the young man can still hear him after the attack. Suddenly, he feels something strange and wonders where his one-shot kill power went. Amidst the smoke, our protagonist appears injured but still standing to the supervisor's surprise. The young man thinks that he already knew about Bode's lightning magic because of his past life and memories. He therefore needed to avoid a direct hit to the brain or heart to survive the attack. Faced with the situation, he reveals he created a blood circuit to conduct the electricity through his body. This way, he took the attack through his arm and guided it to the ground. But enduring it was his absolute limit. With that, our protagonist prepares for a counter-attack using his healing magic. But Bode just scoffs, saying the young man barely withstood the attack with a pathetic effort. Ignoring the taunt, Will tries to use his physical enhancement to get up and fight back. Suddenly, he realizes something is very wrong as his body doesn't respond to his commands. The young man is completely confused because he can't put any strength into his muscles. The supervisor then explains that his lightning paralyzes whoever is hit, and that's an absolute rule. Desperate, our protagonist throws the dagger he has in his hand in a last-ditch attack attempt. However, the man catches the weapon and wonders how many hits the young man can take with his remaining mana. Right after, he launches another lightning attack with all his strength towards our protagonist. In the audience, Erica and the other students watch the scene, completely terrified by the man's power. Our protagonist endures the full force of the attack and admits to himself that the supervisor is very strong. Bode smiles confidently because he knows his unique magic is perfect, which is why he acts with such confidence. Despite everything, the young man refuses to fall and remains standing, even though his legs are trembling. With a determined look, our protagonist screams with all his might that he has decided he will win. He then touches the ground and uses his last drop of stamina and mana left in the fight. With that, he uses his plant manipulation, and a tree begins to sprout from the arena floor. With a shout, he commands the water treasure tree to grow with all its strength and power. Because of this, a giant plant appears in the arena with a very intense green aura around it. The young man explains that the tree absorbs water and can be used as a shield to disperse electricity. However, Bode is not impressed and prepares another lightning attack with a smile on his face. Our protagonist looks up terrified as the supervisor's attack is coming at full force. In the audience, the other students also feel the power and are paralyzed with fear at the scene. The lightning then hits the giant tree head-on, causing an energy explosion. The tree is completely burned, and Bode can't believe the young man survived that. The man scoffs and asks if that was his last trick and calls the defense ridiculous. Suddenly, the supervisor gets confused as he notices something strange growing at the base of the tree. Before his eyes, several red mushrooms begin to sprout rapidly from the ground. He is completely shocked by the scene and screams, not understanding what is happening. Our protagonist then gets up and says that even he didn't believe his plan would work so well. He explains that some plants grow quickly after a lightning strike, and that the scorched earth is perfect. Our protagonist explains that this mushroom is one of them, but it has another special characteristic. The supervisor is completely confused and asks what the young man means by that. Suddenly, the man breaks into a cold sweat as he realizes the young man's real trap. With that, he screams desperately that his body is completely paralyzed and motionless. Our protagonist then warns that the distance advantage is gone and prepares an attack. Without wasting time, he charges forward and lands a punch with his healing magic on the supervisor. With a sinister smile, the man says he will show his strength and the reason he is the supervisor. Without wasting time, Bode lands a powerful punch on our protagonist using his lightning magic. Because of this, the young man is thrown far away and ends up spitting out from the impact of the blow. Lying on the ground, our protagonist is humiliated by Bode, who brags about his hand-to-hand combat strength. The man explains that his unique magic manifests electricity and makes him much faster than normal. Our protagonist becomes desperate, wondering if even after all this, he can't win. With a look of contempt, Bode declares that this is our protagonist's defeat in the arena. He then prepares to deliver the final blow and end the fight once and for all. Suddenly, Professor Veronica appears and stops the man's attack with her sword just in time. She glares at him and asks if he doesn't think he's going too far with this fight. With a cold look, the young woman calls him Professor Bode, showing her complete seriousness. The man then sighs, very annoyed that she interrupted his final attack. He then calls her a rookie and tells the professor not to meddle in his affairs. Our protagonist is shocked and wonders why Professor Veronica is there. She says the fight is already over, and he can heal himself, and there's no reason to hurt him. The professor explains that it only works if he has mana, and that Will has no strength left. However, Bode yells furiously that the young man only lacks courage and unleashes his lightning aura with full force. Veronica says that's absurd and prepares for combat with an intense bluish aura. The two professors then charge at each other for a direct confrontation. Amidst the clash of powers, the young woman glares at him and asks if he's not going to stop. Suddenly, director Arnila Golagran appears in the arena to intervene in their fight. The old man says with an imposing voice that it makes no sense for them to fight there in front of everyone. With that, he places himself between the two professors to prevent the fight from continuing in the arena. The director then turns to Bode and tells him to let this matter go once and for all. The supervisor gets very irritated with the order, but the old man's look leaves no room for discussion. Bode then reluctantly agrees and finally decides to end the fight with the professor. Soon after, the director apologizes to Veronica for the lack of explanation about the whole situation. The old man seems thoughtful and perhaps a little tired of having to deal with the mess. He then announces that the selection for the training is complete and tells everyone to leave. All the students and spectators then begin to leave the battle arena in an orderly fashion. Meanwhile, our protagonist tries to heal himself, but his mana is completely gone. He's frustrated because he doesn't want to lose and realizes the huge power difference between them. Suddenly, Professor Veronica appears and picks him up, leaving the young man completely shocked. Not understanding anything, he stammers her name as the professor carries him across the arena. The young woman then says he fought well and tells the young man to rest because he pushed himself too hard. Our protagonist looks at her with new determination in his tired eyes. He then agrees with the professor and accepts that he needs to rest for now. But he thinks that fighting well isn't enough to achieve his true goal. The next day, the young man walks through the academy hallways with a new focus. He reflects that an elite mage's skill is different not only in power but in tactics. The young man knows he needs to become much stronger to change the future that awaits him. He then goes to the director's office and asks for permission to enter. The director welcomes him and is happy to see him there after the big fight in the arena. The old man is concerned about his injuries, but Will says he heals quickly when he recovers his mana. The director then confirms that he can participate in the training, since he was the winner of the selection. The director reveals that Sirius and Erica also passed, leaving the girl shocked by the news. Will says that Professor Bode failed everyone, but the director says that happens every year. The old man explains that he does it to create a sense of crisis and draw out the students' seriousness. He continues, saying that the training is dangerous, which is why Bode acts like a tough professor. Our protagonist thinks for a bit and agrees that despite everything, it makes sense. He remembers Bode fighting in the war and recognizes him as a hero who saved the world in the past. The director then tells him to form a group with students from other schools as an attacker. He will also have to accept monster subjugation missions, and Will focuses on the news. The young man thinks that in 5 years, the monsters will destroy everything, so he needs to fight now. Our protagonist thinks that monsters are creatures with magical power, and not all of them are hostile to humanity. Some attack only to survive, as part of the natural competition for life. With that, if they were understood, they could even be treated as neighbors. But the world will change in 2 years. Because of the red moon, monsters exposed to it will become ferocious and much more dangerous. From then on, different species of super monsters will unite with the sole purpose of hunting humans. 2 years after all this, the fearsome Demon King will finally descend to Earth. Thus, humanity will fall into a disadvantage, and many nations will perish in the war. Skilled attack mages and knights were highly valued but continued to be taken out one after another. Even healers would be finished off by monsters if the front line was broken. He remembers that when he passed, there was almost no one left to fight for humanity. Faced with the situation, the young man clenches his fist because he cannot let this tragedy repeat itself. He needs to become stronger than in his past life to withstand the great invasion. Additionally, he hopes to discover the cause of the red moon that makes the monsters so ferocious. The director is impressed by his determination and praises the young man's gaze. The old man then says he seems promising, and Will thinks about the professor's caution regarding the training. The director says he especially wanted to give a word of encouragement to our protagonist. Will, however, is very confused by the old man's attitude and doesn't understand the reason for it. Soon after, the students gather outside the academy for field training. At the gate, our protagonist says goodbye to Erica and Professor Veronica. The young man observes his friends with a serious and determined look for what's to come. At that moment, Supervisor Bode arrives walking alongside the prodigy Sirius. With that, our protagonist approaches the man and says he heard about his severe guidance. Bode gets irritated by the approach and asks what the young man is trying to say. He then yells at the young man not to get arrogant and that his attitude hasn't changed anything. The man then tells the young man to do his best in the training and calls him an idiot. But as he turns, he thanks our protagonist for taking care of young Sirius in the arena. Suddenly, the prodigy appears and says he also wants to thank him for the fight they had. Our protagonist jokes with the young man, saying he still speaks very softly. With a smile, Sirius thanks him because now he can give it his all and become stronger. He then reveals that he learned from Bode that as long as you survive, it's not a defeat. Our protagonist agrees and gives a little air punch to the rival who advised him. Sirius gives a small smile at the young man's attitude, showing their mutual respect. With that, the two seal their rivalry and friendship with a fist bump. The prodigy thinks it's good to have more skilled attack mages emerging. He believes this will give them a great advantage in the battles against the monsters. On the other side, Erica calls our protagonist so they can go too. With a smile on his face, the young man replies that he's on his way to join them. Their carriage then moves through the Dunkel forest for the mission. Inside the vehicle, Professor Veronica explains the details of the goblin subjugation. Our protagonist questions if the group members have all been decided. The young woman confirms that Erica is in the same group, and the girl feels a bit intimidated. Soon after, they arrive at their destination to meet the rest of the team. The professor tells them to go, as the participants from the other academy have already arrived. Our protagonist thinks that he didn't have many acquaintances from Zilburn in his past life. Suddenly, a super excited female voice shouts our protagonist's name with joy. Out of nowhere, a blonde girl jumps on our protagonist and hugs him tightly, saying she's been waiting for this day. With a smile on her face, the young woman seems super happy to finally meet the young man in person. The scene leaves everyone shocked, with Erica's jaw dropped and Professor Veronica speechless. Our protagonist tries to pull away and says he has no idea who she is, making the situation tense. The young woman lets him go with a slightly sad face and says she understands our protagonist's confusion. With that, she comments that they couldn't talk properly the last time they met. Soon after, the young woman introduces herself as Marie Goldgrand, the granddaughter of director Arnila Golagran. Our protagonist's jaw drops as he remembers who the girl in front of him is. He then remembers that she is the young woman he healed to get into the Attack Academy. Our protagonist asks about her health, and Marie replies with a smile that she's great. With that, the young woman apologizes for not thanking him sooner, but the young man says it's okay. However, she reveals that she also wanted to do something to repay the favor he did for her. The young woman explains that since she has no talent for magic, she went to study swordsmanship with all her might. Marie then proudly reveals that she got first place in her academy's selection exam. She then comments with a smile that in the end, it seems she has a talent for the sword. Will thinks that going from a sick bid to the top in such a short time makes her a real monster. Right after, the girl holds his hand and says that's why they are in the same group. The young woman promises she will definitely be useful to him, and our protagonist agrees they will do their best together. Will finally understands what the director meant by his request to look after her. Suddenly, Marie notices someone from Heelrick has arrived and pulls him to go greet them. Two other girls observe the scene and comment that they seem very lively over there. The two then approach the carriage, and our protagonist wonders who the other members are. Marie then shouts at the vehicle's window, asking for two young men named Yulin and Turf. Our protagonist is surprised and repeats the name Yulin, as he seems to know this person. From inside the carriage, a voice asks not to rush him, as he's already coming out. A mysterious man then finally gets out of the vehicle to meet them. He introduces himself as Zulin Kyotos, a professor from Hyrich Academy, and asks if they are joining the group. Our protagonist's jaw drops because in his past life, that man was his master. Will remembers that his healing magic was the best he had ever seen in his entire life. Faced with the situation, he's super excited to be in the same group as his former teacher. Suddenly, another young man with glasses asks the professor for a moment as he can't get down. With a smile, Marie introduces herself to the young man and deduces he must be the one named Turf. The boy replies yes, very shyly, and says it's a pleasure to meet them there. His eyes widen when he sees our protagonist and Marie holding hands in the middle of the field. He then turns to the young man and asks with curiosity who he is. Our protagonist introduces himself, and the young man with glasses is intimidated by him being an attack mage. With that, Yulin says this is his group and that he will just observe everything casually. The two are suspicious of the word casually, but Will thinks it's fine. The professor then walks away with his hands on his head, showing his very relaxed attitude. Our protagonist approaches and asks if he can call the professor master. He explains that he also knows how to use healing magic, but doesn't have a teacher to instruct him. Wulen is very shocked because he didn't expect an attack mage who also uses healing magic. The professor remembers hearing something about it and complains about the arbitrary group assignments. Will insists on the question and Yulin agrees, telling him to call him whatever he wants. Marie gets excited and says that if the young man calls him that, she will also call him master. Elsewhere, another group observes them and comments that they can't fall behind at all. They then arrive at a cabin that will serve as the base of operations for the mission. Yulin says that he, Marie, and our protagonist will go ahead to the goblin area, but Will questions him, as a healer like him should stay in the group's rearguard. The man replies that he's the supervisor and tells them not to worry about the rules. Our protagonist then says he will take the liberty of doing whatever he wants. With that, he points to Marie's sword and asks what she intends to do. The girl replies yes with a confident smile and a very intense battle aura. Immediately after, our protagonist firmly grips the hilt of the young woman's sword. The young woman holds the sword with all her might and prepares for combat. She then begins to spin the weapon with incredible speed, creating a hurricane of blades. Soon after, the girl charges straight at the goblins hiding there. With that, Marie defeats all the monsters by herself and celebrates on top of the pile of bodies. Our protagonist then remembers how fragile she was when she was sick in bed. Full of joy, the young woman turns to him with a victorious and proud smile.